Good afternoon. Welcome to the world premiere of Cohn Jr. and Chase Senior. That is Chase Senior. I am Grant Cohn, aka Cohn Jr. Today, Chase, you started some stuff on Twitter, which I like. It was wonderful. And it revealed a lot of, they called it fictional journalism. I'm going to call it lazy agenting or reading comprehension skills. Anyway, you did a report about someone else's report. The agent tried to dunk on you. Can you just tell the good people that watch the show what happened? Like, let's just pretend this was a game and you're at your post-game press conference.
Yeah.
Chase Senior, what happened out there today?
First of all, Grant, great to join you. It's been a long time coming. A lot of people have been on my show saying you got to link up with Grant Cohn. So a lot of people are talking on the internet streets that this is the duo that the people have wanted to see. But for real, you've been a Niners content creator OG for a long time. Had an opportunity to briefly meet you and talk with you in Las Vegas for the Super Bowl. So it's good to finally.
And we said we would do this. So I'm glad that we're doing it. And it really took, sometimes I get caught up in like the day-to-day, but it really took Brandon Aiyuk's agent trying to dunk on you for me to be like, oh yeah, let's definitely get Chase on the show. So Chase, you're just doing your job.
Yeah.
You're just there doing your job, and Brandon Aiyuk's agent comes at you. It's like the 50 Cent meme, like, me? Yeah.
So what happened was there was the report yesterday from All Steelers, which is a publication that covers the Pittsburgh Steelers, that the Steelers
I'm all 49ers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were aggressively pursuing a Brandon Aiyuk trade, and they would be very surprised if they did not land Brandon Aiyuk. So I saw that, and all throughout this offseason, there's been a couple of teams who have been sprinkled into the Brandon Aiyuk trade rumor discussion, but the Pittsburgh Steelers are really the organization that's been talked about a lot as the team that's really looking at Brandon Aiyuk, because their general manager, Omar Khan, is desperately trying to upgrade the wide receiver position. When I was at the NFL Combine, I was talking with a lot of people around the league, and they said, offensive line, wide receiver, don't think they're going to make a big splash at quarterback. They brought in Russell Wilson. The trade value diminished on Justin Fields, so they decided to bring in two quarterbacks, but they're hot and heavy on these wide receivers. And Omar Khan wants to get that legit wideout next to George Pickens to really get that offense in motion, because they've had this inept offensive coordinator over the last couple of years in Matt Canada. They're trying to figure out the quarterback spot. The defense is really good. And Mike Tomlin has not had a losing season in 17 years with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But since Big Ben's arm became cooked, they've been a bad, mundane offensive unit for a long time. And so you pair all of that up with all of the reporting and all of the speculation. It's been Pittsburgh mentioned so much as one of the marquee trade suitors for Aiyuk. So I see this report, and all I did was sit in this chair and I referenced the report. I credited who had the report in the video. On my tweet, I said, according to reports, not according to me. And I shared my opinions on what that report said. And I said, look, the starting point for a Brandon Aiyuk trade, and I've said this all along, is a first-round pick. And Steelers fans are diminishing the talent level of Aiyuk, in my opinion. And it's ridiculous that they're throwing out these trades of a third-round pick for Aiyuk. They don't think he's a number one. And I'm like, well, hold on. He's a 26-year-old who's an ascending player who I still think is scratching the surface of what he can become. He's an all-around wide receiver, the best wideout on the Niners roster, by the way. Great footwork, route running. He had a great connection with Brock Purdy as one of the best vertical wide receivers in the NFL. And he put up statistically a fantastic season in a run-centric offense with all of these other weapons. And he was an all-pro this year, and he was the 25th overall pick in 2020. So to me, the asking price is a first-round pick. So I kind of shared the opinion of, if the Niners want to get rid of Aiyuk, or if he wants out, or the asking price is too high, Pittsburgh could be a destination because they have the 20th pick. And what that allows the Niners to do is to draft a wide receiver, get an offensive lineman, and find your Aiyuk replacement.
Hold on, let me jump in for a second.
And then
let me just jump in for a second. I want to take it back to the agent, because before we get into what the Niners should do, it just kills me what happened between you and the agent. It's like if the agent wanted to say that the original report was bogus, he could have found it on Twitter and said so.
Yeah.
But he said that your
commentary and opinion
report was bogus. So now I just don't know what to. He could have said, Ayuk's not getting traded. But he didn't say that. He said a report about a report is bogus. He could have said, hey, Brandon, why don't you follow the Niners on Instagram again so we can stop all this speculation? But he didn't do that. So let's go back and read the original report, which he didn't refute, because there's a lot in there that you referenced quickly. I referenced quickly. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from, even though the guy took a shot at you.
For sure.
So let's read it together. It's short. Steelers are looking to add a veteran wide receiver via trade before the 2024 season. Their sights appear set on Brandon Aiyuk, which has fans wondering what would a deal cost? Not as much as fans would think. According to a team source, the Steelers and Niners trade talks are real. While nothing is imminent, they would, quote, be surprised if it didn't happen, end quote. But it all comes down to compensation, and Pittsburgh isn't willing to budge much on price. With Aiyuk making it publicly known on social media that negotiations aren't going well with he and the Niners, it appears any team like the Steelers have some advantage in these trade talks. Pittsburgh isn't willing to overpay for a player who isn't going to be around long-term with their current team. What should the expectation be? Just guessing, it feels like a second-round pick and maybe a late-round pick could get the deal done. Then there's the matter of his contract. While the Steelers don't need to extend him this offseason or ever, they probably will. He's looking at roughly $30 million per season after 2024. That'll be handled by the Steelers front office. What they're worried about when it comes to a trade is the Niners taking on some of Aiyuk's $14 million contract this season. This is a very specific report citing a team source.
Very specific.
What they're worried about when it comes to a trade is the Niners taking on some of Aiyuk's $14 million contract this season, a negotiation that will likely end with Pittsburgh paying less for the star wideout than his salary is worth for his first season with the team. No one knows when a deal will get done, but the two sides are in contact. It could come down to the wire in the NFL draft, or it can go on afterward. But until Aiyuk signs his name on a new deal in San Francisco, the possibility that he ends up with the Steelers is very real. That's an extremely specific report with all kind of information that's clearly at least coming from the Steelers or lying about coming from the Steelers. I know Noah. We work at the same place. He is a legit journalist, and I know he's connected with that organization. I know he could just make a phone call. So, Mr. Agent, what did you think of that?
Yeah.
It explains why they think they can get him for a second-round pick. I think the thought process is this. Aiyuk doesn't want to be there anymore. So the Niners have a choice. They could trade him for whatever they could get for him now, or let him walk next year and get the comp pick. What do you want to do? And from the Steelers' perspective, they could just wait a year and sign him. So why should they trade their first-round pick now when they could just wait a freak? It's not like Tomlin's getting fired, right? Yeah. They're patient over there in Pittsburgh. All right, I just talked for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, and look, in this era of fake news journalism, when people are clickbait chasing and they want to get views because that's how things do well, that's how things take off, that's how people make names for themselves, I can see why Brandon Aiyuk's agent wants to control the narrative. But here's the thing. That is extremely detailed, as you mentioned, to just make it all up. And my issue with this is we're going to take nowadays everything that agents say as 100% truth and gospel. Do people understand that sports agents sometimes can get really, really slimy? And then from my standpoint, I don't really consider myself a journalist. I used to work in news as a news reporter on TV. There's a reason I don't do that any longer, because I don't want to do that. I've always wanted to be a talk show host. I've wanted to do this since I was 5 years old. I want to share opinions. I want to share my analysis. That's what I was doing with that video. And people take it as if I'm trying to report the news. No, I'm referencing a report out there that is extremely detailed. And why didn't Brandon Aiyuk's agent decide to quote tweet that report from that person? And I'll also say this. The job of a sports agent is to get their client paid. They always want to control the narrative. And some people will fire back saying, this makes no sense. Him controlling this narrative, it's not any leverage for Brandon Aiyuk to get paid. He wants to control the story. He wants other teams to still be a suitor for Brandon Aiyuk to drive the price tag up as far as a trade goes, or as far as the Niners' potential contract extension for Brandon Aiyuk. And then lastly, before I throw it back to you, Grant, this is what I reported in March, is that Ryan Williams of Athletes First is best friends with John Lynch. And John Lynch was the best man at his wedding.
Yeah,
and they want to get a deal done.
They're working together.
This level of relationship here, where I imagine Ryan Williams is also sticking up for John Lynch and the Niners as well by refuting some of these reports.
Right, because when an agent takes things public, it's like he's trying to work against the general manager he's trying to negotiate with. Like, he's exhausted all options, and they're not going to have that kind of relationship. They're very close friends. What I think is interesting about this report, too, is they mentioned that the Steelers don't want to pay all of Aiyuk's salary this year. So it's a complex negotiation. And the way I interpret it, they say they are in contact and they can't tamper, but they're talking about a potential trade. And the Steelers would say, all right, you want that first round pick? You want that first round pick?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we don't want to pay this salary. So let's start there. I mean, they're not just going to give away the first round pick. Okay, well, how about if you pay $10 million of the $14 million salary? How about that? How much do you want to be in the top 20? And tell your fans that you won the trade. It's just money, right? Like, that's the kind of conversation I think they're having over the next week. And I think that's why I think it's kind of silly for the agent to go on social media and try to shut it down. Like, what, you teams aren't talking to the Niners about trading for Brandon Aiyuk? Like, he's not displeased. He didn't unfollow the Niners. Like, we all know what's going on. And if you want to like quibble with one person's little Chase Senior's interpretation of someone else's report, like, that doesn't do anything for me.
No. And you don't want fake news to spread, right? But are you just shutting down Noah's report and the work that he may have done where he's talking to Pittsburgh Steelers team sources? Ryan Williams, you might not know the team sources that Noah is talking to. So again, we're taking this as if, oh, you have to trust the agent. You have to trust the agent. The agent doesn't care about some of this other stuff. What they care about is getting their client paid. Why? Commission. They get paid once that athlete signs that contract.
And again, what did Noah write in this? He said basically the Steelers feel like they feel pretty confident that they're going to get Brandon Aiyuk. They also feel it's not going to take a lot of draft capital to get him, and that it could drag on for a while. It could happen in the offseason. It could happen during the season. They don't really seem pressed. And again, the idea is if you don't trade for him this year, you could just freaking sign him next year, and he'll be 27 at that point. So patience is a virtue in this case.
And is it a bad thing that Aiyuk has ascended every year that he's been in the NFL? He was a JUCO guy who then went to Arizona State. So he had to really work his ass off to go from JUCO to Arizona State. Then every year he's been in the NFL, all four of them, his receiving yards have gone up, 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 to the point where he's looked at now as a complete wide receiver who had great production this past year as a focal point of the offense, unseated Deebo Samuel as the number one wideout, the number one target for Brock Purdy. He was a second-team All-Pro, and these teams are interested in Aiyuk because he's a really good player. So why do you feel the need to take to social media to shut down these reports when they're talking about positivity with your client because he's sought after for how good of a player he is?
Okay, I thank you for taking the conversation here. Why did he do it? Okay, let's try to put the pieces together before we move on. Well, we know he's not just friends with John Lynch, but very close friends. And what would John Lynch want? What is in John Lynch's interest if during this time, they don't really know what's going to happen with Aiyuk. They might trade him, they might not. Lynch likes moving in secrecy. He didn't want anyone to know what quarterback they were going to take in 2021, even though it didn't really freaking matter. Like, it had to be a mystery. Everything has to be a mystery. So if they're going to trade Brandon Aiyuk, I think he would prefer Aiyuk's agent to make it seem like it's not going to happen. Because who knows? I mean, maybe the Niners want to draft a wide receiver in round one. And if everyone knows they're in the wide receiver market, it'd be harder for them. Yep. Whatever reason. I think clearly Lynch wants this to be private. And Ryan, the agent, is ensuring that it is, or trying to batten down the hatches and keep the leaks from spreading. But it's like, talk to the Steelers.
Yeah. Also, John Lynch, Ryan Williams, Brandon Aiyuk was the one who tweeted directly at Mike Tomlin. He tweeted directly at Mike Tomlin, which only leads to speculation, Ryan Williams, from your client about him maybe wanting to play there, with all the other reports from Noah, from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, that they want a wide receiver and they have the draft capital in order to trade.
Like anyone who has a source in Pittsburgh is saying like, yeah, Pittsburgh, they're talking like they think they're in on this. I mean, maybe the Niners don't want to trade him, but it seems like the rest of the league is kind of just circling around like buzzards, like, yeah, but you're going to have to, aren't you? And it's going to be for less than you'd like, huh? Because you kind of pissed off Aiyuk a few years ago. That's too bad. And you don't really pass enough. And you already paid Debo, huh? And you got to pay Brock Purdy. You're in a tough spot. Hey, we'll take him off your hands for a second round pick.
They're in a tough spot too.
Yeah, you're in a tough spot. Hey, but we'll give you a second round pick. It'd be nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
the other thing that I think too, you just look at the timeline right now, right? And I think there's a little bit of pressure on both sides here because Calvin Ridley gets that deal of $23+ million. That reset the wide receiver market. Then Devontae Smith signed his deal, $25 million. That reset the market again. So if the Niners got out in front of this, I thought that Aiyuk all along was going to get more than Debo because he's the better wide receiver than Debo. And that starting point was probably going to be at about $25 million. But now Aiyuk's better than Devontae Smith, in my opinion. So now the asking price is 25.5, 26, maybe 27. And that coupled with this is a very, very deep wide receiver class where if you want an X boundary perimeter wide receiver, there are those prototypes. If you want a slot wide receiver, there are a lot of those in the draft class as well. And with the draft coming up, the Niners are trying to figure out their plan. If Brandon Aiyuk wants $30 million per year, let's say, and the Niners don't want to give him that deal, they probably have to find a way to trade him away, which is why the team and the agent are trying to control the narrative right now because they want the leverage before the draft.
Correct.
Because then if the Niners trade him away before the draft, that's when they get his replacement who's going to come at a fraction of the price.
Yes. Yes. So this is all about the agent and the 49ers maintaining maximum trade value and market value for Brandon Aiyuk to get him the most money possible on his next deal and to get the Niners the most draft capital possible in the trade, if that's what it comes to, which I think it is. Real quick before we move on, best guess, does he get traded?
I think he comes back to the Niners. I just think this is a classic San Francisco organizational strong arm tactic where the front office in Prague, they're playing hardball right now. You look at the history of when the Niners have taken care of their homegrown players. It's literally happened in 4 consecutive off seasons. George Kittle, Fred Warner, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa. I think they find a way to get a deal done with Aiyuk, and it's going to check in now that the price tag has gone up $26, $27 million per year, which in turn, I think next offseason forces them to have to get rid of a marquee veteran, whether it be Deebo, Juszczyk, or George Kittle.
Well, Juszczyk for sure. Okay,
because they're going to have to pay Brock Purdy as well.
That's true. We're going to talk about Brock Purdy in a minute. I got a bonus topic that I haven't prepped him for.
That's fun. Let's go.
But first, Bill Barnwell writes for ESPN, and he does a little thing every year, which is pretty cool. It's like a mock draft, but instead of picking every team has to make a trade. So it's not necessarily that he's predicting this will happen. He's sort of saying that it could or should. And so I'll put it on the screen and we can sort of peruse it together because it's quite intriguing. It has Bill Barnwell suggests the Niners trade up to the 5th pick in the draft with the Chargers. So the Niners would get the 5th pick and a 6th round pick, and they would trade Brandon Aiyuk, their 1st round pick, 31 and a 3rd. And they would go up to get Malik Neighbors, one of the top wide receivers in the draft. And I mean, from a draft value perspective, he has this, like, if you add this up, that's about pick 17. I mean, the difference between those, pick 17, which would be a top 20 pick. And the idea is for the Chargers, they drafted a wide receiver in round 1 last year and he flamed out and he wasn't that good. So you want to get a sure thing to go along with Justin Herbert. And they have nothing at wide receiver. And for the Niners, they could get Malik Neighbors. They just have to maneuver around a little bit. What do you think of that potential?
Yeah, Quentin Johnson is the wide receiver they drafted last year who was not good as a rookie. And I don't know how much the Chargers make sense just because you look at their track record of what they've done this offseason. They let go of Mike Williams, cap casualty. They traded away Keenan Allen, cap casualty. They had to restructure the contract for Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack just to bring them back. So you're telling me that they got rid of 2 wide receivers because they were too expensive to now trade premium draft capital to land Brandon Aiyuk, who's going to be due a contract that pays him average annual value of $25 to $27 million, let's call it in that ballpark, doesn't make a lot of sense for me. Now, if the Niners did go this route, this is the type of move, this is the type of maneuvering that they're looking at here. And that draft capital, I think, would be pretty difficult to turn down because you get a sure thing, really talented prospect in Malik Neighbors, who is going to come over the next 5 years if you exercise that fifth-year option at a minimal price tag, a fraction of the price of Brandon Aiyuk. And that's maybe what the Niners thinking could be, but it would certainly be filed under the blockbuster variety for sure.
Now, again, they say here that the Chargers have more than $100 million in cap room in 2024. Is that true? After cutting Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, I know those two had gigantic, enormous cap numbers for this year. If they were to extend Brandon Aiyuk, he wouldn't have a big cap number this year. He would in a couple of years.
Yeah. And you can always put dummy years on that contract. You can backload it a little bit. And I know that going into the new year, they were like $20 million over the cap number. And that's why they had to trim all of that salary. The restructures for Bosa and Khalil Mack could have opened up a lot of money on top of them getting rid of those wide receivers. So if you pair that up with some salary cap gymnastics, maneuvering the cap a little bit, and then you backload that deal, that could be the team for Aiyuk. I'm just not sure that's the team that kind of makes sense as far as the timeline goes.
Maybe not. I just feel like it's a great fit in the sense that him and Justin Herbert would be a great pairing.
No doubt.
Because Herbert has the arm strength to really take advantage of Aiyuk's full skill set in a way that I don't think we've seen yet. No offense to Brock Purdy, who's a hell of a quarterback, but Aiyuk's a deep threat too. Yep. How many deep shots did they really take to Aiyuk last year? Like 3?
I mean, so Purdy's deep ball completion rate was number 1 in the NFL, despite his receiver target separation being 14th. And if you think about it, what other wide receivers on the Niners were catching long balls? It was Aiyuk, and that was pretty much it because Debo has trouble tracking it. Kittle works down the seam and down the numbers. Yeah. Jawan Jennings is more of a possession wide receiver. So a lot of those deep shots were to Brandon Aiyuk.
So I feel like he's a great fit with Herbert, but I also feel like he's a great fit with Harbaugh because Harbaugh wants to run the ball and he would value a wide receiver who is passionate about blocking like Aiyuk is. So I feel like rather than hope and pray that Malik Neighbors is an all-pro, just trade for an all-pro. And the Niners would do this because ideally they'd keep Aiyuk if there was no salary cap, but it's like plan B, and plan B involves Malik Neighbors. It's not too bad.
Harbaugh would absolutely love Aiyuk because Harbaugh is all about that type of physicality, being a dog, playing until the whistle. I also think back, though, to what Harbaugh said from the NFL owners meetings, and you were there. I'm not sure if you were there around Harbaugh. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he said, offensive line, that's what you got to build up because the entire rest of the team all depends on the offensive line more so than any other offensive unit. And if they go offensive line, I think Joe Alt is the option there because I think for the next decade, he's going to be a perennial all-pro.
I'm going to make a hot take right now that people didn't see coming. I have an opinion on Joe Alt.
You don't like him?
I don't like him.
Interesting. All right.
Michael Lynch.
Oh, Notre Dame.
High cut.
Yeah.
I don't like him. I just want to say that about Joe Alt. Joe Alt, I've been watching you, and I don't think you're going to work out. We'll have to see.
If we talk about similar build, they do have that similar build where when you see them, you're like, doesn't have a lot of bad weight. There's not a lot lot of bad there, but they can get pushed around sometimes too.
I don't know. We'll see. I'm betting against Joe Alt. But before we wrap up this Brandon Aiyuk topic, let's check out our sponsor, BetUS, because I requested this and they delivered. These are the official. Oh, excuse me. I want to actually wager on it. That's okay. So these are official odds for Brandon Aiyuk, his next team. Let's go to football. And we'll go to the next team special. Brandon Aiyuk right there. Next team, if not the Niners, plus 200 Steelers, plus 600 Panthers, plus 600 Patriots, plus 700 Cardinals. I don't get that. There's no way they're trading them in the division.
But Grant, remember, the Steelers aren't interested, even though the odds makers have them at plus 200.
They're not interested at all, even though their own team sources say they're interested.
Vegas is backing Pittsburgh. The odds makers are backing Pittsburgh, but Ryan Williams says, nope, not the case. Fake news.
See, I mean, I absolutely believe that the Steelers are interested and that there's been talks. Doesn't mean anything is imminent, as Noah said, but I'm not necessarily certain that the Steelers will win this bidding war. I don't think they even want to engage in it. I think they think the market's going to come to them. But if someone like the Chargers or the Bills or the Chiefs, a dark horse comes in and offers a better trade package, I think the Niners would take it. I kind of want the action. I like the Chargers at plus 900. Can you imagine? I feel like the Niners can't responsibly trade Aiyuk to the Chiefs or the Bills. That would just be, you can't do that. You might have to face them.
As far as odds go, Patriots at 6-1. I kind of like that as far as odds go and just that being a realistic team.
It is realistic, right? Yeah. Oh, I mean, they have no quarterback under contract.
And no wide receiving talent.
They need wide receivers. All right, I'm gonna hedge. I'm gonna put $10 on each because I can. Because I'm partnered up with BetUS and they power the show. Boom. To win $150. Big money. Big money. Just a second.
BetUS, America's favorite sportsbook and casino. Live betting and racebook. We're celebrating 30 years with a historic offer. A 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits. Plus 10% gambler's insurance. Get started today. BetUS, where the game begins.
Yeah, and don't forget that 24/7 customer service. Okay, I got a question for you. Do you think that Brock Purdy could face a regression this season? A statistical regression, because he's been exposed to the league for about a season and a half. NFL defenses are very, very good to the point that the NFL is constantly changing rules to increase scoring and failing to do so. So hold on. I got some numbers. Before you say no, I just want to throw this out there. So he really had a tough game against the Ravens on Christmas. Yeah. Since that game, started 5 games. Ravens, Washington, and then 3 playoff games. In those 5, it's a small sample, 5 games. Quarterback rating, 83. And in the playoffs, all 3 games had a quarterback rating under 90. It seems that the book on him is getting better in the sense that people feel like if you can play man-to-man coverage and force him to make sort of tight window throws that don't require anticipation as much as arm talent, that you got a fighting chance. What do you think, man? Is he gonna regress a little bit, or is he gonna be right back in the MVP conversation?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have. I mean, it's really hard to replicate what he was able to do in 2023 and 2024 because he was really, really good. And I think what separates him and what is so impressive about his overall ability and abilities is just the timing, it's the processing, it's the touch and the accuracy. Yeah. You know what I want to see more from head coach Kyle Shanahan is him putting Brock Purdy on the run a little bit more with some bootlegs to the right to clear up that vision line for Purdy a little bit because he is a little bit shorter behind that offensive line, but also to pose that threat of running the football against the defense. And on the Pat McAfee show the other day, Purdy even said, Kyle, I hope you're watching. Maybe we can sprinkle in some RPOs from time to time because that can keep the defense honest a little bit.
Hold on, what?
What?
Say that part again. Say that part again.
On the Pat McAfee show, that part?
That was Purdy?
He said that, yeah, he's like, hey, Kyle, hopefully you're listening so we can sprinkle in some RPOs a little bit more.
No way.
Yeah. I mean, he said,
I don't watch Pat McAfee show on principle. He took shots at me. So that's one less view he gets. I'm going to put him out of business by just not watching. Yeah. I mean, who hasn't? During the Kinlaw thing, he was wrong. Oh. It's all right. But so Purdy was on the show.
Player always protects the player, right?
Yeah, always. So Purdy was on the show and he said, hopefully Kyle's watching. Hopefully he lets me do more RPOs.
Yeah, that's something along those lines. Like more running plays or more RPOs, but a running play would obviously most likely be an RPO in this instance.
Cool.
So
interesting.
Yeah, and look, you think back to what he did against Green Bay, what he did against Detroit when the pocket broke down and he had to improvisationally make a play. I thought he was really impressive in that way. I mean, he won, what was that? The Packers and Lions game in instances with his ability to make plays with his legs. So I want to see that be a part of this offense a little bit more. But yeah, there's no doubt he struggled a little bit against some upper echelon defenses. And that's not just this past year against Cleveland. Let me throw that game in there too, against Minnesota, against Baltimore, then in the playoffs. But 2 years ago too, wild card round against Seattle, a lot of people forget, a little bit choppy to start. And then against Dallas in the divisional round, he struggled a little bit. But what I give him credit for is that how he's able to respond to that early adversity, finish the game strong, and he was clutch in those playoff games 2 years ago, in the playoff games this year. Against Cleveland, too, still drove the team down the field if Jake Moody didn't shank that ball. And I thought he was okay in the Super Bowl. I mean, the offensive line protections did him absolutely no favors, and it just had him under duress running for his life all throughout the night. So I'd like to see Shanahan change the protections a little bit, but like you think about some of the other numbers that I think aren't like casual box score hunting statistics that Purdy did last year. Yards per attempt, number 1 in the league at 9.6. Deep ball completion rate, number 1 in the NFL at 55.3. Pressured completion rate was number 4. Red zone completion percentage, when the field gets condensed and things are moving a little bit quicker, he was 70.4%, number 2 in the NFL. And then the deep ball catchable rate percentage, number 1, and the receiver target separation was 14th. So while you can say, yeah, defenses can catch up to Brock Purdy, he might struggle, I could make the argument and counter against that and say, well, he finally has a full offseason. And as you get older and more experienced, usually with that more experience comes better play and just understanding the league as a whole.
No doubt. I think he's a hell of a quarterback, but all those numbers you just listed off, they're so good. Number 1 in the league and number 4. And I just feel like he set the bar so high. It's going to be
to regress then.
But statistically, I don't know that he's like his play is going to actually regress. I think he's a hell of a quarterback, but the book on him is only going to get better, which he can't. I mean, that's on any player who's in the league. And then I feel like his supporting cast is only going to get worse as he gets more money, which he can't control. I mean, that's any highly paid quarterback in the league, but he was in this really advantageous position where he came in as pretty much close to a finished product. He was very experienced. He was on a great team. There wasn't a real book on him. Anytime he rolled to the left, people were like, oh my God, he can do that? Like, it seems like teams have a better idea. It's been about 20-something starts. Once you've been exposed that long, there's a book on what you do well, what you don't do well. Everyone knows what you want him to not do, which is throw over the middle and what you and dice up your zone coverage. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting. He's going to get $60 million a year. He's going to be maybe an MVP candidate again this year, making $900,000. But it's going to be hard to keep up that level of efficiency. And even if he can, it doesn't mean that he's fallen off. Just saying. Just want to temper expectations
having the same offensive line, I think, is going to help him. Having the same contingent of weapons around him, I also think is going to be beneficial, barring a Brandon Aiyuk trade. And I think what defenses are going to do, to be honest with you, throw out a lot more zone coverages, because against Baltimore, that's where he really struggled. Some of the disguised blitzes, corner blitzes, that's what Steve Spagnuolo did in the Super Bowl with Trent McDuffie, and that really caused a lot of problems. That can also be tied to Kyle Shanahan not really having great protection set up for Brock Purdy as far as the offensive line and just the nuances of offensive line play. But you're right. I mean, he put up such great numbers in 2023 that it is easy to kind of regress in a way from how well he played, being top 5 in MVP voting and being top 5, top 10 statistically in all those categories that I just mentioned.
We'll see what his numbers are if they trade Brandon Aiyuk. Gio Du says, this talk of wide receiver makes me sure they're picking defensive line. Well, you know ball. You know the 49ers. All Niners says, Grant, will there be a press conference with Kyle, John, etc. prior to the draft? That way you can ask them. Yes, it'll be Monday at noon. Good question. King, 2144. Thank you for the $2. Tinker. Yeah, but there's so much to this offense main.
Yes. I loved a good comment in there too. I think from WG, he said, marriage equals regressed.
Okay. Another one. How important is this draft for the 49ers? They got 10 picks, only 3 before day 3, and they're becoming an older team. Their last 2 drafts were pretty barren, with the exception of Brock Purdy and Jair Brown.
Yeah, and they've missed a couple of selections here over the last couple of years, which I think you're starting to see the after effects of that. And I think that's why in free agency, they really prioritized building up depth defensively, on special teams,
Mhm.
offensively. They're still kind of set right now just because of the bevy of weapons that they still have on that side of the ball. But when you combine some of the misses in the third round, in some of the middle rounds, and not having some first round picks after the Trey Lance trade, I think that puts pressure on San Francisco to really have a good draft here. And they have really valuable picks too. 31, you can get a high impact player, an immediate starter, I think, at right guard, center, or offensive tackle. If you trade away Aiyuk, I think that you can get a really solid wide receiver. In round 2, you can still address the need of offensive line depending on what you do in round 1. I think you need to start looking ahead at the cornerback position, because this cornerback room, Charvarius Ward, Diamador Lenore, Isaac Yiadom, Ambry Thomas, Chase Lucas, they're all on expiring contracts.
Mhm.
So this cornerback room looking ahead to 2025 could look completely different. So you might have to look at perimeter corners, slot corners, offensive line, as I mentioned, is a massive, massive need. I think that you need to start looking ahead toward the post George Kittle era. Jared Wiley out of TCU is a player who I really like, who's 6'6", 250 and ran a 4.5, 4.6 40-yard dash. And defensive tackle, you have no young players there. And edge rusher, you're a little bit barren because, yes, you brought in Yetur Gross-Matos, who's been completely unproven up to this point, but Leonard Floyd is on the wrong side of 30. And at defensive tackle, the only young player that you have there is Kalia Davis, and he's been injured. And linebacker with Dre Greenlaw, safety as well. Like, there are a lot of needs on this roster, maybe not pressing needs for 2024, but beyond, this is how you become a sustainable football team.
Yeah, I know you're not out here in the Bay, but recently people out here, we were watching the Warriors just sort of crash and burn, and their dynasty just end in a kind of an embarrassing fashion. This playing game, it's clear they held on to this team too long, and I think what was the undoing for them is they just missed on so many draft picks over a long time.
Yep.
They drafted Curry and Clay and Draymond, and they put that team together internally, but Kuminga and James Wiseman, and just for years and years and years, they couldn't really replenish and have a next wave. And it's like the Niners are dangerously close to that. All their good players are 26, 27, or in their 30s, something like that. And this is sort of like their last chance to not completely fall off in a couple of years.
And I think Bob Myers saw the writing on the wall. That's why he
Mhm.
got out a little bit early, because he saw the decline coming, and he didn't want to have to be that decision maker to get rid of a Draymond, get rid of a Klay Thompson, because the emotional aspect of that is hard. And it's obviously dissimilar, but somewhat similar. Moving on from Eric Armstead was an emotional decision for the 49ers. He had been a team captain. He's from Sacramento. He'd been a productive player. I wouldn't say he'd been an elite player, especially with that contract that he was given, but they had to make the difficult choice to move off of him. And I thought they made the right move in moving off of him with Malik Collins, who's been half the price, or is going to be half the price, and has been more productive the last 2 years. And that's why right now you have to look ahead like any good business does. And you have to have foresight for what's going to come in the future. And I think the Niners understand that. That's why they got rid of Eric Armstead. And that's why over the next couple of years, with the ages increasing for some of their core players and this roster getting more expensive, while wanting to stay younger with a Purdy and an Aiyuk, you might have to move on from a Debo. You might have to move on from a George Kittle or a Kyle Juszczyk. Those are realities that are going to stare the Niners in the face. Fred Warner would be a difficult one too, but if he goes somewhere else in a year or two, that's not going to stun me either.
Right, but I think the Niners could have the right idea. I mean, they clearly have demonstrated it by cutting Armstead. I applaud that. If they want to make another tough decision like that again next year, say with someone like Debo, well, you got to have a wide receiver ready to go.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to draft one this year. So it's so important. Like the last few years, Danny Gray, Ty Davis Price, a bunch of just whiffs.
Cam Latu.
Yeah, like that. Jake Moody, who's actually their best draft pick, and he's just not good enough for what they took there. They passed on starters on the offensive line at key positions. They can't do that again this year. Else
Trey
it's gonna
Sermon,
bite
did
them.
you mention him? I mean, brutal miss.
Also, there was that one guy, quarterback. What was his name? They gave up a lot for that guy. So yeah, this one's important. First round pick in 3 years since they whiffed on Trey Lance. Speaking of that first round pick, Pick 31. Ideally, what would you like to see them do with it? Move up, move back, stand pat, take a certain position, fill a certain need, just take the best player available. What would you like them to do?
Yeah, you just said something too I want to hit on because it kind of got the brain going a little bit. I've talked about this on my show on the 49ers Report, where I think that you could see this core of offensive players return in 2024. But if you're thinking ahead right now and saying, okay, we might not be able to afford Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel, maybe this year we draft Deebo's future replacement, which is a Malachi Corley type of player, who is a Deebo Samuel clone, or an Xavier Legette who has that A.J. Brown thick type of body. So that kind of got the wheels churning a little bit in my head. What I think the Niners need to do in the draft, I think what's held them back in the biggest of games the last 3 years is bad offensive line play. And you look back to the 2021 NFC Championship game, what happened? Offensive line broke down. Aaron Donald burst through. Jimmy Garoppolo has to throw that heave to JaMychal Hasty. Interception. Game over. You blew that fourth quarter lead too because protection was an issue. 2 years ago in the NFC Championship game, Philadelphia ruined your party. I know you had Tyler Kroft out there on Hassan Reddick, but the Niners got their asses kicked in the trenches all throughout the NFC title game. And then the same thing literally happened against the Kansas City Chiefs once again in the Super Bowl this past year in February. So if I'm at 31 here, I'm looking at a couple of different options. I really like Graham Barton as a guard. I like Troy Fuatano out of Washington as a guard. That probably requires a trade up. I like Zach Frazier at center, Jackson Powers Johnson at center. You can play Graham Barton at center. If you want a developmental offensive lineman where Colton McKivitz, because you extended him, might be your stopgap option once again, even though he gave up 45 pressures last year, you take a swing on a player like a Marius Mims or a Tyler Guyton. Mims had 8 starts in his college career. Guyton has 13 starts at right tackle in his college career. And those are the types of players that I'm looking at. I would not be shocked if they go defensive tackle for the reasons that I mentioned a little bit earlier, because you literally do not have a young, dependable defensive tackle on that roster. The backups are Kevin Givens and Kalia Davis right now. You really need to fortify that. If they go edge rusher to get a young player like Chop Robinson, you know, I could see the Niners going that route. If they went wide receiver, it wouldn't shock me. So it's very interesting because everything I think is on the board. And then we talk about the Niners cornerback room all being on expiring deals. What if a Kool-Aid McKinstry falls? What if a Cooper DeJean falls because the Niners saw on tape how much havoc Trent McDuffie was able to cause because he's a versatile player like DeJean, good athlete, slot, off the edge, hybrid linebacker. I like where the Niners are kind of set up here, where they could go best player available depending on how the board falls.
When you start talking about draft prospects, you kind of sound like Mel Kiper. Anyone ever tell you that?
I don't want to sound like Mel Kiper, but you know,
just in cadence.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. The reality is,
I've done so much. Not like what, not the content.
Okay,
but you know what you're talking about. But just you got a little Mel Kiper in you, which is cool.
Hey,
you can take that anyway. I just wanted to say that round one.
I like
you look. Yeah, you got it too. You got the look going on too. I'd like to see the Niners trade down. Like if Penix is there, if Bo Nix is there, don't reach for a need like you always do in round one. Like you always freaking do. Trade down. I know they traded up for Brandon Aiyuk, traded up a few spots. So I guess if there's a wide receiver that Kyle Shanahan falls in love with, he's got a good track record with that. Anything else? And I'm really curious to see what they do without Adam Peters this year, because it seemed like all the moves they made in free agency were like Brandon Staley moves.
Yep.
Guys he knew, guys he'd worked with, which is fine, but those guys were all 30. And which person in this front office knows the players in the draft? Is it John Lynch? I'm curious. It's not Kyle.
No. Yeah, Adam Peters was doing the work. He was doing the legwork.
Yeah, he was doing the homework and said, here, you watch these 50 people, John, make a decision. Now, I guess they had new people that got promoted, but I'm curious to see how good they are. I mean, they couldn't have been worse than they did the last 2 years.
Yeah. I like the trade back option too, because let's say you're at 31 and a Raiders wants to move up to 31 to get Bo Nix or Michael Penix, right? And the Niners are looking at the board and they're like, okay, Kingsley Suamataia, the BYU offensive tackle, Patrick Paul, Roger Rosengarten, who the streets are talking, the Niners really like him. He's available in that 40-50 range. You trade back, you gather some more draft capital. I don't hate that strategy.
Yeah, like you have pick right now, what is it? 31, 63, 94, and then a bunch of stuff on day 3. How about get a bunch of stuff on day 2?
Yep.
That's what I would do.
Players there.
high impact players, and don't let Kyle make the picks. Like, make it a collaborative group project as opposed
No running
to
back in the third round, please.
no tight end, no blocking. The thing about the Cam Latu pick that killed me is like, he's a blocking tight end, but they couldn't even get him to the regular season because he was so bad at catching the ball.
Could not catch the rock.
You can't take a blocking. They took a blocking tight end and a kicker in round. That's peak arrogance. It's like, look. We're so much better than the rest of the league that we're just gonna fill in around the edges. And no.
Yeah. Shocking when you think about it, with where we are in modern day football, that the Niners went with the blocking tight end who can't catch the football and a kicker in round 3, when you can get some really legitimate players who can be plug and play guys right from the jump in the third round.
The Niners are kind of conservative in certain ways. Like, other things, they're patterns. You talked about Kool-Aid McKinstry and Cooper DeJean. I love those players. They're both really good, and they would help the 49ers. Did you know that since Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch have been here, they have never drafted a DB before round 3? Not one. It's like, why? And part of me feels like John Lynch is in his office somewhere being like, you know what? I was a third-round pick, and I was a Hall of Famer. So why should why can we go ones? Yeah, I mean, we can find good ones. I was round 3. Why can't I find good ones around 3? And they have found good ones, but it's possible that the best player available at pick 31 is Cooper DeJean or Kool-Aid McKinstry or another DB, and it's kind of rigid to say, well, we don't do that.
Good businesses are malleable with their thinking. Like, good businesses are malleable with their thinking. You have to be able to adapt and adjust. And that's kind of what annoys me sometimes with the Niners, is how rigid they are. Oh, we've always done things this way. Why change? Well, if you keep having that mindset, that's when other teams pass you by.
Dave Barclay says, GC, this guy is good. I got on late. Keep it up.
Salute, man. Thank you.
This guy, I feel like Dave just heard of you.
Maybe.
Shout out to Chase Senior. He's got like 130,000 million subscribers on YouTube.
Catching strays from Aiyuk's agent today. No biggie.
Yeah, that's when you know you're big time.
I want the strays. By Niners players these days. It's crazy.
Who you blocked by?
Debo.
Me too.
Yeah.
Aiyuk hasn't blocked me yet.
Yeah, me either. I love Aiyuk though. He's a dog.
Me too. King 2144 says if Brock has stats close to last year, 50 mil, 100 mil. You know who never got 100 mil? Mac Jones. 100 mil. 100. Remember that? All Niner. Purdy also had a statement about BA that sounded like a farewell in the Pat McAfee show.
He talked in past tense. I didn't make too much of that. He basically said, I want what's ever best for him.
So do I. Aru Illustri says, sorry, Grant, I can't watch this guy. Pick a team.
Because I cover the Eagles. Gets a lot of people triggered.
I'm not a Niner fan. You watch me.
Yeah.
Did you not know that I'm not a Niner fan? Anyway, Chase, that's all the news for today. Thank you so much for coming on. You were great. It was an honor and a pleasure.
I appreciate you having me. Honor and a pleasure to be on this platform on your show, because you're one of the OGs out here on these streets, man.
Oh, thanks, man. You're one of the, I feel like I'm Zoolander and you're Hansel because you're so hot right now.
Appreciate
Anyway, that was the old reference. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure you follow Chat Sports and subscribe to Chase Senior. I'll be back tomorrow. See you guys.
See ya.